Hi, I'm Jim Knotts, President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Welcome to today's virtual reading of the names. 2022 marks the 40th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. As part of our commemoration, we'll host an in-person reading of the names at the wall from November 7th through 10th, 2022, when all 58,281 names on the wall will be read aloud. In the lead up to that event, we'll be reading names each day online while sharing the photos of these heroes. For our daily virtual reading, the names of the service members will be read by month and day of death between the years 1956 and 1975 in alphabetical order for the given day. We apologize in advance for any mispronunciations. Know that our readers are doing their best to honor these service members. We hope you'll listen and watch each day and share with others as we remember and honor those who gave their lives during the Vietnam War.
John K. Adams, Jim Lamar Elstock Jr., Antonio Lopez Alho, Henry Lewis Allen, Lonnie Douglas Alley, Frankie Eugene Allgood, Joel Gary Anders, Ivy Thomas Anderson, William Larry Andrews, Ross Applegate, Edwin Lawrence Armstrong, Robert Louis Atkinson Jr., Craig Philip Averill, Jacob Benedict Babin Jr., Jean Thomas Bailey, Gerald Laverne Baker, Michael Roger Ball, Michael J. Bandy, Larry Earl Barger, Jimmy Dalton Barnett, Donald Eugene Barnett, James Charles Batson, Benjamin Joseph Bellardi, Richard Louis Belinge, Philip Craig Ben, Patrick Henry Benz, Stephen Michael Bazensky, Godfred Blankenship, Walter Clay Booth, Jesse Carl Bowman, Richard Eugene Brenneman, Robert Thomas Brinkley, Joseph M. Brown, Owen Davis Brown, Jr., Robert Eugene Bryson, Ronald Wayne Burkhart, Clarence John Burley, John Richard Bushman, Robert Lee Butler, James Henry Campbell, Jr., Michael William Campos, Nicholas Cancia, Ezequiel Arnaldo Cantu, Barton Wainwright Carey, Timothy Lynn Carley, Eddie Ray Casey, Stanley Melvin Klingler, Robert Daniel Coffey, William Harold Cook, Charles Truett Corson, Raymond H. Kroll, Robert Eugene Cundiff, Roland A. Cutchins, Leroy Walter Swickla, Ronald Caleb Davis, Robert Eugene Davis, Joseph Carmine DeJessa, Jack Taylor Dempsey, Jack Edward Derrico, Frank Anthony DeFilia, William Warren De Niro, Douglas Eugene Dickey, John Paul Didier Jr., Jerry Dishman,
Larry Eugene Elmore, Richard Jean Elzinga, Joe Alexander Escandon, David Estrada, Richard Evancho, Michael Andrew Fay, William Charles Fenton Jr., Wayne James Fielding, Robert Wayne Fields, J. John Fishbeck, Robert Foreman Jr., Donald Stephen Forrest, Donald Charles Faust, Earl Wayne Fry, Johnny Edward Gant, James Raymond Gentile, Stephen Henry Gerlach, Alvin Ralph Gibble, John Patrick Giddings, Larry Allen Gillespie, Dennis Stephen Gleason, James Tony Gorsuch, Barry Lee Graham, Paul David Grosso, Larry Edward Green, Willie Frank Green, Dennis Dale Greer, James Anthony Grafassi, Raymond Blaze Guarino, Gerald James Gunderson, Eduardo Leopold Gutloff, Gregory Lee Habits, Leonard John Hall, Joel Richard Hankins, Johnny Dariel Harris, Charles Laverne Hatcher, Eddie Lee Hatley, Theodore E. Heinzelman, James Edward Henry, Richard Kenneth Hill, Daniel Kenneth Hinkle, Joe Earl Holloman, John Richard Horton, Gomer Davis Hoskins, Jr., Charles Lee Howe, Martin Reinhold Huart, Jr., John R. Hubbard, Glenn David Hubbard, James Hudspeth, David J. Huffman, Willie Jackson, John Henry James, Jr., Guy Frederick Johnson, Richard S. Johnson, Jr., Kenneth Kaminsky, Michael Patrick Kelly, Ernest Claney Carr, Jr., William Arthur Kinder, Francis J. R. King, Rance A. Kirby, Vince Robert Kieselewski, Alan Spence Cohn, Philip James Kreck, Jr., Dean Wilbur Kruger,
Wayne Dale Kruger, Frederick Robert Kutzer, Floyd Michael Larrabee, Larry Joseph Larson, Douglas Wayne Lee, Donald George Leopard, Joseph Bertrand Levesque, Jose Lazama Jr., Robert Darrell Leeser, Bobby Pat Lindley, Roger Mark Link, James Lee Locke, Richard Eugene Lomax, Leonard Long, Clyde Austin Lucas, James Allen Malecki, Leo John Metalowitz, Marvin Lacey Mayo, Frankie B. McDaniel, Carl McFadden Jr., David Ramirez Mendoza, Rand Russell Merker, Cecil Ray Millspaw, Stephen Michael Minnick, Theodore N. Mashikis Jr., Thomas Peter Mitchell, Carlton Lee Monroe, Charles Ray Moomey, Terry Dwight Moore, Maurice Moore, Angelo Raymond Morales, Antonio Ruiz Morales, Robert Wesley Morris, James Myron Moser, Robert Bruce Moso, Glenn William Mowry, Don Manuel O'Shell, Roger Louis Olson, James Allen Osterloff, Claude James Owens, Gavin Pascoso Pastores, Lawrence Paul Pennell, Ernesto Salvador Perea, Lawrence Phillips, Robert J. Pietkowski, Leon Lovell Poland Jr., Robert Dale Pope, Barry Francis Price, Gary Martin Reedy, J.C. Reel, Donald Joseph Richter, James Michael Risch, Wayne Eric Reisner, Donald Reed Robertson, William James Rogers IV, Carlos Wilson Rucker, Robert J. Rylander, Raymond Frank Shopman, William Wesley Schoth II, Gary A. Schultz, Michael Joseph Silito, James Adrian Setter, Terry Dean Shaver, Marvin Shell,
Robert Edward Sheridan, Robert Bernard Schrack, Jr., Ralph Sibley, Charles Kenneth Sides, David Albert Semanowski, Harold Joseph Simmons, Lawrence Sklodowski, Ralph James Smith, Joe Wilkins Smith, David Tobias Solis, James Augustine St. Cyr, John Allen Steele, James Lloyd Stewart, James Francis Stolinsky, David Stone, Douglas Earl Stover, Norman Howard Strength, Alfred Henry Soar, Hoyle Terry, Jr., Ronald Winston Tompkins, Gordon Edmund Tibbets, Harvey Joseph Tompkins, John Michael Turner, Victor Harold Van Vactor, Albert Allen Wenzel, James Lehman Verhelst, Charles Craig Vickery, Johnny Wayne Wanamaker, Maurice Joel Washington, James Harold Watson, Robert Oliver Wells, Cyril Jeffrey Westley, Steve Randall Whitaker, Herbert Franklin White, Charles Henry White, Richard LeBrew Whitesides, Otto Tom Wyben, Gary Lee Wilcox, Lawrence M. Wilhelm, Jr., Joseph F. Willis, Donis Glenn Willis, John William Wilt, Jr., Sylvester Wright, Jr., John Robert Wynne, Roger Dwayne Young, Gerald Zlotowski,